Thank you, Allison. It's so wonderful to be here today and share some more about the work of Shigeko Kubota. I just want to thank the JASA Program Committee for inviting us here to speak today and for hosting the first program not only on a video artist, but a Japanese American artist, which I think is also new for you all. So I'm going to take a moment to introduce Shigeko and her practice, and then I'll let Erica take us through a virtual tour of liquid reality. So Shigeko Kubota, now frequently referred to as the mother of video art, was a New York-based artist who maintained a connection with Japan throughout her career. She was truly a global and transnational artist, curator, and writer. And I think her career is very interesting because it provides an opportunity to frame and connect and contextualize the work of artists from Japan who are really working in a very international context for their whole lives. Kubota was born in Niigata, Japan, to a very artistic family. Her grandfather was a Nanga painter. He painted in a Chinese style. And both her parents were teachers. Her mother was a music teacher and her aunt was a dancer. So her family really encouraged her to pursue her artistic interest from a young age. And by her second year of high school, she was already being recognized for her painting. And her painting, as you see here, Sunflowers, was admitted into the Nikkakai exhibition, and her artistic promise was covered in the newspaper, I believe the Mainichi Shimbun. And so in going to college, she decided to study sculpture. She attended Tokyo University of Education, which is now Tsukuba University, and then decided to remain in Tokyo and pursue her interest in sculpture with an apprenticeship with the artist Kiyoshi Takahashi. Throughout that time, she also lived with her aunt, who I mentioned before, the avant-garde dancer Chiya Kuni, who introduced her to the avant-garde community in Tokyo, including Higher Ed Center, the experimental art group founded by Akasegawa Genpei, Jiro Takamatsu, Natsuyuki Nakanishi, and group music or group ongaku, founded by Takahisa Kosugi and Shuko Mizuno. So during her time at university and earlier in her career in Tokyo, Kubota really moved towards an abstract style of sculpture. As you can see here, her in her studio in her 20s, she started working on some abstract figures of heads, which she called death stones. And she began submitting some of these sculptures to exhibitions around Tokyo, including the New Work Society, the Shinseisaku Society, which some of her sculpture teachers were also involved. She also submitted works to the 15th Yomiuri Independent in 1963, and you can see her here welding some of those sculptural pieces that were included in that exhibition. Throughout the 1960s, Kubota attended and also participated in a number of experimental performance-based works, both with Higher Ed Center and group ongaku, group music, many of which were hosted at the Sogetsu Art Center in Tokyo. And this is also where she first came in contact with the New York avant-garde and attended a performance by John Cage, and then became more connected with some of the artists that she later would live and work with in New York through Yoko Ono. In December of 1964, Kubota held her first solo exhibition at Naikwa Gallery, which was a rental gallery in Tokyo. The installation, called First Love, Second Love, consisted of mounds of waste paper covered in white fabric and with sculptures scattered around for audience members to move through as they pleased. It's a realization of a conceptual instruction work, which you can see here on the invitation. And although we don't know if Kubota actually conducted a performance during the course of this exhibition, and we do know that no one reviewed the exhibition, which incentivized a frustrated Kubota to move to New York in July of 1964. Kubota moved to New York with fellow artist Mieko Shiomi at the invitation of the founder of Fluxus, George Machunas, to join the Fluxus movement, which was a avant-garde Soho-based art group. Fluxus was a loosely organized movement, and most of the artists involved sought to blur the lines between art and life, and participated in collaborative object making and performance based artworks, much like the work going on in Tokyo at the time. With High Red Center, it was very anti-commercial and socially critical. So these works were often very humorous and involved audience participation, and also included elements of chance incorporated into these works. And you can see here a multiple that Kubota created very early on after getting to New York, associated with the Fluxus commune dinners that she helped to prepare. These are some napkins that she created with lips attached to them for people to take along with them. Around this time, she also performed what is now probably her most notorious work, vagina painting, which involved her attaching a paintbrush to underwear and performing a painting piece on the ground for the perpetual Flux Fest a year to the date after arriving in New York in 1965. So Kubota's interest in audience participation and elements of chance really deepened as she had two very formative experiences meeting Marcel Duchamp, and continued her friendship and collaborations with the composer John Cage. And although Mieko Shiomi returned home to Tokyo, or to Japan, sorry, rather, Kubota stayed on and was increasingly known as the vice president of Fluxus. And she really became a key figure that tied the avant-garde between Tokyo and New York together. So during the late 60s and 70s, Kubota also actively collaborated with the experimental music collective Sonic Arts Union, and in addition to Fluxus. And after taking up video in the early 70s, participated in the avant-garde art festivals around New York, as well as the women's video festivals in 1972 and 1973. In 1972, she also co-founded the multicultural feminist collective Red, White, Yellow, Black, which you can see a poster here with artist Mary Lucier. And each color of the name of the group corresponded to the ethnicity of the participants involved, Cecilia Sandoval being Native American, Mary Lucier being Caucasian, Kubota being Asian, and Charlotte Warren being Black American. Although the group only performed together twice at the Kitchen in New York, and rarely performed or worked together in a formal manner afterwards, this performance between four female artists together was completely unprecedented and helped Kubota solidify her interest and practice in video. At the same time, Kubota was also writing for Japanese magazines as a freelance correspondent, covering the exhibitions and culture in New York City. So during this time, she also covered the very important exhibition on video art, TV as a Creative Medium, at Howard Weiss Gallery in 1969. And this was really when she started thinking about taking up the medium of video more seriously. I really feel that her experience writing for Bijutsu Techō and other publications around this time helped her to synthesize and understand both the changes going on in American culture and the artistic innovation around her as she started developing her own practice. And so from the early 70s, when Kubota got her first video camera, she sort of separated her practice into two categories of video diary and video sculpture. Kubota often described her video diaries as video autobiography. And from the time that she acquired her first Sony sort of Portapak, around 1974, she was constantly capturing footage from both her personal and professional life, from playful footage of trips around Europe to really painful personal moments, including the death of her father and hospital visits. The foundation has hundreds and hundreds of hours of raw footage, partially edited footage, and fully edited footage from Kubota's video diaries that have never been screened before to the public. And many of the finished diaries are between 10 and 30 minutes long. As you can see from this grant proposal that Kubota submitted, I believe in the late or mid to late 80s, Kubota was already aware of the way that the new relationship with technology and video, which made it possible to be constantly documenting our lives and revisiting moments from our past, was really altering the way that we remembered and connected with others, even after death. She writes, "Hopefully my diary will bring out those hidden memories of humankind from the 70s and 80s, and this will enrich human history." So here are a few still images from Kubota's video diary chapters, Europe on Half Inch a Day, and her Chicago diary from her time teaching at the Chicago Institute of Arts, as well as her Soho rain damage, which covers some flooding and rain damage in her studio space in Soho after a roofer failed to properly fix the roof. Ooh, pardon me. Oops. So some of the video diaries are already available and distributed through the Electronic Arts Intermix, EAI, and many are included in major collections already around the globe, including the National Museum of Art Osaka and MoMA. 9 of the 12 chapters listed in Kubota's original proposal are actually completely finished, although about half of those have never been screened. So please stay tuned to hear more about those being released for both research and exhibition purposes from the foundation. Kubota's video sculpture, on the other hand, combined Kubota's interest in the new medium of video with her formal training in sculpture. In response to most video at the time, which was transmitted over cable programs or screened as one channel on a monitor in an alternative space, typically not a museum, she sought to restore a physicality to the medium by encasing it in predominantly plywood sculptures or part of larger video installations with multiple channels, all running simultaneously. In this work, Rock Video Cherry Blossom, an LCD screen is actually embedded into a foam core rock that would have typically been used, I guess, on a movie set or something of that nature, a prop, if you will. So she began using this term video sculptures instead of video installations around 1976 when she was planning an exhibition of her work in Germany. she was working with the gallerist Rene Bloch, and he had some questions about whether or not the concept of a video installation would translate well into German. He thought it might elicit ideas of plumbing for a German audience. So from that moment on, she started using the term video sculpture almost significantly. And I think Erica, her curation of liquid reality really captures the innovation and relevance of the concept of a video sculpture. So I'm going to let her elaborate a bit more on that in a moment as she takes you through the exhibition. So it's also around this time in 1974 that Kubota became the founding curator of Anthology Film Archives in New York City. And as curator at the Anthology Film Archives, she worked tirelessly to organize inclusive video programs that championed the work of diverse artists, many female artists and artists of color. This included a co-organized event with the Japan-based group Video Hiroba in Tokyo in 1974 called Tokyo New York Video Express. Kubota actually hand carried the tapes to Tokyo for these 3 days of screenings, and they very much are, the program is very much derived from some of her presentations early on at Anthology. So she held the position in Anthology until 1982, and I really feel that the impact of Kubota's video program and the connection between her curatorial practice and her artistic practice are two topics that deserve further exploration in the future. In 1979, Kubota received a fellowship to work in Berlin, and this really initiated one of the most productive periods of her life. She began producing and exhibiting video sculptures across America, Europe, South America, Asia, and had many major exhibitions of her work from the 1980s and into the 1990s. In 1991, the American Museum of the Moving Image held a retrospective of her work that traveled both to Japan and Europe, yet the scope of her practice really up until this point has been sidelined in mainstream art historical narratives. After her passing in 2015, the Shigeko Kubota Video Art Foundation was established at the artist's bequest. Our mission is to preserve and advance Kubota's legacy while also promoting wider histories of video art, in addition to supporting research, artistic experimentation, and broader public access to video and new media through a wide range of public programming and initiatives. Kubota's archive and our offices are actually located in her historic home, as you see here on Mercer Street in Soho, New York City. And this is where she lived and worked from the early 70s with her husband and fellow video pioneer Nam June-paik. The Kubota Foundation is custodian to Kubota's core collection of videotapes and video sculpture, in addition to the artist's extensive personal archive of flux objects, which are multiples, paintings, photographs, ephemera, journals, and the artist's correspondence. We're in the process of restoring all of Kubota's video sculptures and archiving her full video collection. So these will be more readily accessible for scholars, curators, and students in the future. In parallel, we've been collaborating with many of our brilliant colleagues at MoMA and around the world to create programs that highlight Kubota's innovative artistic practice and her contributions to the expanding field of video as both a collaborator, a writer, and a curator. This includes a survey of the artist's work, which is now on view in Japan, and actually started at the Niigata Prefectural Museum of Modern Art in the artist's hometown of Niigata, and will travel from where it is currently at the National Museum of Art Osaka to the Museum of Contemporary Art Tokyo this fall. as well as and it's also, her work is also featured in a exhibition that is exploring the intersection of art, dance, performance, and protest in Essen, Germany at the Folkwang Museum. So we hope that wherever you are in the world, you'll be able to experience Kubota's video sculpture in person and engage with her work. But if not, we're really pleased to have Erica here to take us through the MoMA exhibition. So without further ado, I'll kick it off to her to take us through Shigeko Kubota Liquid Reality at MoMA.
Thank you so much, Lia. And thank you everyone for having me. It is my utmost pleasure to share my take on Kubota's work and to take you through the exhibition. Lia, would you mind advancing? Perfect, thank you. So just to follow up on a little bit of historical context that Lia touched on to help illustrate exactly how and why Kubota's work was so groundbreaking. In the early 1970s, the first portable video equipment started to become more widely accessible. I can't overstate the importance of this advancement. Since video technology had previously been limited to TV studios run by large corporations, this newfound portability became a means of decentralizing power. Early video art, therefore, was fundamentally oppositional, not only to mass media content and consumption, but to all existing frameworks that had traditionally governed the circulation of art. In addition, as Lia started to talk about, for the first time, people could view what they were recording in real time and immediately play it back, which was transformative for practitioners of all disciplines, including activists, psychiatrists, teachers. For artists, this capability prompted new investigations of technology's relationship to the body, to language, to the natural world, and time itself. In parallel, newly invented tools made it possible to manipulate video's electronic signal, generating previously unimaginable patterns and colors. Kubota's first experiments with the medium yielded otherworldly self-portraits. This is a clip from her early video, later titled Self-Portrait, for which the artist layered and manipulated her own image. Kubota was drawn to the organic process and the utopian ethos of early video making. She described the Sony Portapak camera as a new paintbrush, and as such, she was among the first of her peers to position video as an expressive art form. This began what would become a career-long practice she called video diary, for which she traveled throughout Europe, Japan, and the Western United States. For Kubota, video was inseparable from the tangible. Here she is with her trusty Portapak, which weighed in at nearly 19 pounds, in stunning contrast with the nearly invisible recording mechanisms of today. Kubota wrote in the early 70s, "I like video because it is heavy," as she began exploring the possibilities of making video physical. With this exhibition, I had the extraordinary opportunity to present a constellation of Kubota's landmark video sculptures that had not been seen together in 30 years. It was my primary aim to facilitate a close reading of each of these works in order to demonstrate both how radical they were at the time they were made and how revelatory they remain today. The exhibition encompasses two adjacent spaces on the museum's fourth floor. The gallery pictured here is anchored by two volumetric sculptures from the mid-70s, which encase video monitors in plywood forms constructed by the artist Al Robbins, her early collaborator. Among the first artists to combine video and material form, Kubota integrated the oppositional medium of video and the sanctified realm of the object. By concealing the exterior of the video monitor, and therefore its brand name, Kubota not only made video part of the object, arguing for its permanence rather than something fragile or ephemeral, she also isolated video from the context of mass communication and consumer culture. In doing so, she seemed to create an entirely new plane for viewing moving images. Moreover, she combined her videos, which often referred to her own lived experience, with conventions of minimalism, abstraction, and other art historical touchpoints. Kubota's first video sculptures engaged with the work of Marcel Duchamp. Similarly to a work of concrete poetry, her Duchampiana Nude Descending a Staircase, seen here, reinterprets Duchamp's 1912 painting using film and video, mixing and filtering the images, and then repeating the video on multiple monitors, all within a three-dimensional staircase. Duchamp had become increasingly important for a new generation of artists in the 1960s, and Kubota continually invoked the legacy of the ready-made as she challenged prescribed notions of both video and sculpture. I lost my place. It never happens to me. One moment, please. The concept of Duchampiana oscillated, therefore, between a tribute, a critique, and a reinvention. And the series set the stage for Kubota's expansion of video sculpture as a means of exploring the world and her place in it. With Three Mountains, Kubota combined the diaristic format she explored in her single-channel videos with her newfound sculptural vocabulary. This is also the first of her sculptures where she juxtaposed the speed of modern technology and the slowness of geological time. In the artist's words, quote, lines of perspective stretch on, crossing at steep angles, sharp like cold, thin mountain air. Time flies and sits still. No contradiction, end quote. Each monitor is placed in a mirrored chamber, creating an added layer of optical manipulation. She described this work as an autobiographical object, one that reflected her life, her time spent in the vast emptiness. Sorry, Leah, I think maybe we went ahead. I think we have to go back one. And back one more. I think it's going forward instead of back. That's it, perfect, thank you. She described this work as an autobiographical object, one that reflected her life. Her time spent in the vast emptiness of the deserts of the Western United States was deeply impactful. In Three Mountains, she contrasted documentation with heavily manipulated colorized footage to complicate her relationship to that landscape. Here is a view inside the central pyramid element, which is too tall to actually look into without leaning on it, which posed a challenge for us at the museum. So we captured a 180-degree video of the interior that we've made available in the exhibition. She described Three Mountains as a work of structural video, a term she also applied to proposals for installations of television monitors in the desert, as we see here. These are incredibly fascinating interventions in the landscape itself, which went unrealized. By contrast, we have nearby the intimately scaled Berlin diary, which MoMA recently acquired for the collection. For this work, Kubota inscribed a poetic text on a thin sheet of quartz, which she affixed to a small television using a piece of twine. Her calligraphy, illuminated by the electric glow of the screen, replaces the images that populate her videos. By exposing the monitor and combining it with handmade elements, even going so far as to sign the screen, Kubota transforms a symbol of mass communication into a tool for personal reflection, invoking her description of video as a living altar. With the presentation in this gallery, I wanted to highlight the power of Kubota's visual language, which ranged from the subtle to the monumental, and to shed light on how her background in sculpture informed the desire to present video in such a way that you must encounter it with an awareness of your own body. The presentation in the adjacent gallery, the Kravis studio, presents a set of sculptures made in the first part of the 80s that convey a sense of weightlessness, a float, a liberation from the constraints of both video and sculpture that's suggested by the phrase liquid reality. River at right, Video Haiku at left, and Niagara Falls 1 at center are characterized by suspension and reflection. With these works, Kubota changed the position of television monitors in space and reimagined them in relation to the architecture of the exhibition gallery. This disruption of the horizontal structure of mainstream television viewing was groundbreaking, and it was achieved with an economy of means that makes these works radical and poetic at the same time. We worked closely with the foundation on all aspects of the exhibition. In particular, I wanted to highlight the way in which we enabled river and video haiku to extend to the 25-foot ceiling height of this gallery in order to highlight the greater significance of their geometry. With River, Kubota harnessed nature to comment on video's capacity to mediate information. She turned the monitors upside down and made their screens visible primarily through the unstable surface of water, creating mirror reflections of media reflections. We can go to the next, perfect. The videos move very quickly, which you can't see in this image, with the seductive pacing of advertising and what is perhaps her most pointed commentary on the mass media. But true to form, this work is also one of her most poetic. Kubota invites us to revel in the sublime beauty of the shifting reflections. And in another layer, she invokes a reference from her personal history, the Shinano River in her hometown, referenced here in this study, as a metaphor for the way in which electronic signals connect societies. The phrase liquid reality comes from Kubota's own writing about this work. By presenting these works against the backdrop of West 53rd Street, I felt we could emphasize the importance of Kubota's engagement with the environment, invoking the artist's prolific travels, which served as the basis for many of her works, and her exploration of the increasingly symbiotic relationship between nature and technology. Thinking about the ways in which early video art was a countercultural art form at odds with corporate TV broadcast, I love that you can actually see the NBC studio tower at Rockefeller Center just beyond Niagara Falls, which skews and inverts 10 television monitors in cascading descent above a reflecting pool. Video haiku suspends a round monitor that slowly swings back and forth, capturing the work's surroundings through a nearby CCTV camera and reflecting them in a mirror sculpture on the floor. Kubota's decision to use a live feed rather than pre-recorded footage for her haiku feels significant. By training the camera on the primary viewing point, she heightened the perceptual experience of the viewer and therefore the experience of video as sculpture. This work drives home the way in which the apparent formal simplicity of Kubota's sculptures belies their complexity. While the sculptures in this exhibition were made after Kubota's influential Fluxus period, which Lia spoke a bit about earlier, we can find traces of that movement's principles in the sculptures' cross-disciplinarity, as well as in their embrace of chance operations and the irregularity of nature. This early painted canvas, which still hangs in the Mercer Street loft, cuts to the core of the expansion of art that connects Kubota's early actions to her video sculptures. It depicts a Zen Buddhist phrase, which translates literally as moving clouds, flowing water, and conveys a state of openness to all possibilities or absolute freedom, the liquid reality that Kubota found in the emergent video art form, and that compelled her to create new ways of working that proved both unique and game-changing. Kubota had a rich history with MoMA, through which she played a key role in expanding the video canon. I think we could go back one. Yeah, thank you. She was the only woman to participate in the inaugural panel discussion of the important conference Open Circuits, an international conference on the future of television, which took place at the museum in 1974, around the time she became video curator at Anthology Film Archives. Notably, she took this opportunity to advocate for the accomplishments of women in video, which speaks to her importance as a curator and collaborator, as well as an artist. Her Duchampiana Nude Descending a Staircase was the subject of a crucial projects exhibition in 1978 at MoMA, organized by Barbara London, which led to the museum's acquisition of the work in 1981 under the auspices of the Department of Painting and Sculpture. As the first video sculpture to enter the collection, this work signaled the museum's forward-looking commitment to hybrid moving image-based artworks eventually paving the way for the creation of a curatorial department and conservation focus at the museum dedicated to media and ultimately performance. I'm struck by the various dimensions that make Kubota's sculptures feel so fresh in our current moment: their inherent variability, their economy of means, the collaborative processes from which they emerged. These factors contribute to our understanding of the works as conceptual gestures that will surely continue to allow for ever-evolving discoveries, perspectives, and interpretations.
Thank you, Erica, for that walkthrough of the exhibition. I hope that everybody's able to get there in person at some point over the fall. And I just want to also add that there is an exhibition catalog for Liquid Reality that's available through the MoMA bookstore and on the MoMA website, I believe. And it features a wonderful essay by scholar Gloria Sutton, in addition to Erica. And I hope that everybody will get a copy and delve a little deeper into some of the aspects of video sculpture.
Lia and Erica, thank you so much. I would like to start off the Q&A section. One of our attendees had a question, I think for Erica, asking, could you say more about what you mean by utopian ethos of video?
Oh, yes, I would love to. So when video was becoming more widely accessible, firstly, as I kind of alluded to, it virtually exploded all existing frameworks of exhibiting art, of selling art. In one aspect, it created a sort of democratization of the art making process. It was a new tool. So it was really free from precedents, free from Eurocentric precedents of art making, free from male-dominated precedents of art making and circulation. In the very beginning, this equipment was not easy to get one's hands on. It was expensive, it was heavy. And in that vein, it encouraged or sort of forced a lot of collaboration among artists. So there was a lot of sharing of knowledge, sharing of equipment, sharing of tools. This was something that could be infinitely reproduced, infinitely copied. So again, a lot of the hierarchical structures that people were used to were broken down. And another really important part of that narrative is that this art form was so new, it was not being shown in a traditional gallery or museum context. It was being circulated among and experimented with throughout various exhibition spaces that we describe as alternative art spaces that really served as laboratories for artists to be trying out their ideas. So in that sense, there was this, so there's just sort of this, I think in all of those aspects, there was this sort of the sense of freedom and sharing and accessibility that hadn't really existed before.
Another question sort of following that is, did Shigeko receive any kind of corporate funding? And because she was using Sony's Portapak, you said, would she have gotten any money from Japanese companies?
So as I understand it, Lia, I'm going to let you finish this answer, but I'll start by saying the story is that she received her first Portapak camera from Shuya Abe's wife. Is that correct, Lia? So she actually had access to the first camera that she used, not through a corporate sponsor, but through this kind of sharing among artists and collaborators. But I'll let you finish.
Yeah, I pulled up, actually, this ties in really well to the first question as well. And Erica's amazing explanation of sort of the democratic leveling that most artists felt came with video art. It was very much a blank slate, and there was opportunity for all different types of artists to kind of make their mark. But this work, Self-Portrait, which recently entered the MoMA collection, was actually one of the first works that Kubota made with her first Portapak. And while she didn't have a sponsorship, necessarily official sponsorship from Sony, she was able to obtain technology a lot of the time before it was readily available in the United States because of her connections in Japan, which was really an important factor in her always being kind of at the forefront of experimentation with new video technology and editing techniques that were available.
And Lia, maybe you could speak a bit to this. We have a question about the relationship between Namjoon Paik and Shigeko Kubota, about who influenced whom. How did Paik feel about Shigeko's using the name Global Groove, the same name of one of his most famous pieces?
Oh, I just want to clarify that the name Global Groove is the name of the exhibition that Kubota's work is currently featured in Germany. That was very much a Paik work. And although the two artists didn't really collaborate, I would say, in a formal sense, they lived and worked together. So they were, of course, exchanging ideas and working alongside one another. The only instance that we know of the two artists presenting their video jointly was a small exhibition in the early 1970s at Wesleyan University, where the two artists were actually invited to do a night of performative video screenings by the artist Mary Lucier and her then husband, Alvin Lucier, who both were teaching at the university. So it's not really a question of who influenced who. They were kind of working in parallel alongside each other, and they certainly had impact on one another, but I think that's also something that definitely deserves further exploration in the future.
Another question is, because we know that you're the Director of Programs and Research at the Shigeko Kubota Video Art Foundation. Is it possible to visit it? Does one have to make an appointment? And when one goes there, if one can, what would one see?
So right now we're only open for research purposes. We hope that one day in the future we'll be able to welcome people in to just visit the loft and to see the space where the artists lived and worked. But for now, we're kind of focusing on the archival work that needs to be done to make sure that all of their collection is readily available, that Kubota's personal collection is readily available for research and exhibition. If you were to enter the loft now, you would see thousands of letters, videotapes, all kinds of posters, everything really that Shigeko had her hands in from the early 1960s, entering New York and working as a Fluxus artist to the late 2000s, when she was still really not creating sculpture, but had a painting practice and like a watercolor practice and a haiku practice. So there's a wide range of material at the foundation available for researchers at this point.
And Erica, this question is for you. What is MoMA's view of collecting more video art from Asian artists in the future?
It's very much one of our primary collecting goals. Absolutely. And just to follow on an earlier question, I just wanted to say in relation to collaboration and how endemic collaboration was to early video practice, I highly recommend everybody take a look at Gloria Sutton's incredible catalog essay, and an excerpt from that essay, which actually touches on that very subject, is actually now available on MoMA's website.
we have a comment from an attendee who says, it's great to hear Erica and Lia comment on the collaborative nature for artists downtown at this time and show Joan Jonas. The two shared an address on Mercer Street and continue to do so with the Shigeko Kubota Video Foundation, keeping that creative spirit in the Mercer loft alive. And sort of a follow-up to that is, did Shigeko Kubota have, I know that we know that she taught, but did she have any disciples or any apprentices? I guess maybe Lia, is that, I think that's a question for either of you.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I would say, I don't know if disciples is necessarily the right word. I know that the Mercer Street loft where Kubota lived was certainly a place of cross-pollination between many different types of artists. That's a wonderful connection with Joan Jonas living next door. Marcia Hafif also lived next door, as did Donald Judd, excuse me, and Yoshi Wada, Ayo. There are lots of artists kind of living in the neighborhood. And then, as Erica mentioned earlier on, speaking about some of Kubota's sculptures, her practice really kind of involved a lot of collaboration where there were certain artists that contributed to the video editing, such as Paul Guerin and Robert Harris, and Al Robbins and Sridhar Bapat are two other artists who also contributed significantly to Kubota's video sculpture. Oops, I think I lost the screen for a moment. One second. So collaboration really was at the core of Kubota's practice. She did teach at the School of Visual Arts and the School of the Art Institutes of Chicago, as well as Brown University. But if there are students of hers that are out there, we would love you to come forward and would love to learn more about your experiences with her, because that is something that definitely deserves future research.
Is the foundation transferring the videotapes to more permanent media?
So all of the tapes are being digitized. So they will be available in a digital format so that the tapes themselves can be properly conserved, and they're just a little too fragile to be viewing the work on those tapes. Mm-hmm. And I will say Erica will be speaking, I think, sometime soon in the future about some of the aspects of the conservation of these video sculptures and video itself through the IFA at NYU. So if you're interested in some of the restoration and aspects of video digitization and things like that, then you should definitely tune in for her next talk.
And another attendee is wondering if you'd been planning to include Kubota's letter to Machunas and other works by Kubota in the Silverman Fluxus collection.
A great question. Is it a question about when that material will be shown in the future?
Yeah.
Or
Mm-hmm.
Well, we would very much love to show that material very soon. This exhibition, for me, it was very important to position Shigeko, position her video sculptures within the context of the history of contemporary sculpture, for one thing, and as the media art pioneer that she was. We are so fortunate to have such an incredible trove of material from Shigeko's Fluxus period. And we're also fortunate that we've had the opportunity to show several of those materials, including the letter to Machunas, in recent years. And I have no doubt that the letter in particular and other materials will be exhibited again very soon. They are treasures of our collection, to say the least.
And then our final question is considering the strong proto-feminist nature of Kubota's vagina painting. Can you detect any threads of feminism that run through her video art?
That's a very interesting question. I think that this is something that definitely deserves further attention. And I think if you go to some of Kubota's published interviews, you'll see that she had sort of a conflicted, complex relationship with being identified as a feminist artist, particularly with relation to vagina painting, only because she felt that she wasn't very excited to perform the work in the first place, according to some of her her interviews, and was urged to by her male collaborators to do so. So despite this being touted as one of the feminist performance pieces, major proto-feminist performance pieces in art history, she had sort of a little bit of a complex relationship with feminism. And I think that this kind of has to do with her place in second wave feminism and her relationship to her peers as an Asian immigrant female artist, working in the United States. But there is work being done on her video diaries and some of the feminist aspects of those by Helena Shasovic at CUNY, and I believe Gloria also touches upon this and really encapsulates the nature of Kubota's feminism in her work. But because she was coded as foreign and not necessarily like included in the mainstream for the most part, it is kind of a complex and strange relationship. I will say that I do think a lot of her work can be categorized as feminist, but it's not overt in a way that we would necessarily expect. And much of her work was showing her own personal experience as an Asian American woman and as a female artist through her video diary, but then also through her curating at Anthology. It was quite a feminist program where she really supported the work of her contemporaries, including Joan Jonas, Susan Milano, Shirley Clark, Joan Logue, even Japan-based video artist Fujiko Nakaya, as well as emerging female artists, including Paula Weiss, who was based in Mexico City, I believe, and Janice Tanaka, who could have been one of her students at the Art Institute of Chicago, but I'm not entirely certain. So while it wasn't overt, I would say, in much of her work in the way that it is in vagina painting, she's definitely dealing with the issues that that artists face as both female artists and artists of color.
Lia and Erica.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say thank you. Thank you so much. Actually, Joan Logue just wrote in to thank you for your very thoughtful presentation. She says she's sure Shigeko would be happy for all your words and efforts.
Oh, thank you, Joan. We're so glad you could join us.
And I'm very, very glad that you both could join us tonight. And I do hope that you will tune into our next presentation about washi transformed, with art historian Mayor MacArthur on October 12th. And I would also urge JASA members to look forward to their part number 2 of Impressions, volume 42, which should be showing up in people's mailboxes this week. So I wish you all a very pleasant evening, and please look at the full moon tonight. It's going to be an especially big, beautiful full moon for the autumn. Thank you so much, and good night, everyone.